This has been a very tough week from beginning to end. Even
Exactly.
thinking about September 11th, a day after September 11th, but everything that's gone on this week, it's been so real. And it's been a kind of week where, you know, mental health wise, I think we all are struggling a little bit this week.
Exactly. I've really found myself torn on so many fronts with this. And some of it is as a father, like, as a son or an individual, I worry about me, but when you start worrying about your children or your children's children, as we get older in years, um, you think differently, I wanted to kind of share today. I think I have a different or unique perspective on things. Not that it anything special, but later in my life, I've had a bunch of things thrown at me, which has changed my identity in so many ways. Um, and I think it's helped me to understand different people and different cultures in a way that's somewhat different. And for those who don't know, um, this was my book, Recycled, and basically it's my adoption journey. So this was very personal for me, and my family, and my children, and my career. It was something that really impacted me strongly. And I'll give you a brief history of it for those who don't know. I was adopted as a child, and I was adopted during the what they call the baby scoop era. And it's also known as closed adoption era. And during those days, if a young woman got pregnant, if she was single, they either got married, the old shotgun marriage, or oftentimes they would go away to visit an aunt, where they would be sent away to a maternity home. Also, were called home for wayward women. And while they were there, during the 3 to 6 months that they were there, once they started showing, they went through some training or some indoctrination, if you will, to convince themselves that they need to give up their child. That their church, their priest, their doctor, their family is like, you can't keep this baby. You're a single mother. Just think of what a better life this child will have with, a couple, an intact family. So that was me. That's what I went through. And I really hit the lottery when it came to family. My family was fantastic. We had a close-knit Italian family. And I say in the book, and it's kind of true, you grow up with one view of the world, and that was my view of the world. And I say, when you're born in Erie, Pennsylvania, and you're Italian, that immediately makes you Catholic, Democrat, and Yankees fan. So those were my three really big pillars of my identity. I say those were like the four corners of my identity in my life. Italian, Catholic, Democrat, Yankees fan. And then the roof on top was American. We were all American. Well, later in life, it turns out that I eventually found my birth parents, and it started off with my birth mother. And what I found when I met my birth mother is that, her and her family came on the Mayflower, so they were primarily British. Um, and I was like, oh, that's different because I was told all along that I was German, Italian, and Irish. My adoptive parents were Italian. My father was Italian, my mother was German and Irish. And I was told I was coincidentally the exact same ethnicity as my parents. So that's what I went on. That was my identity. So like I said, so then, in my 40s, I found my birth mother, and it turns out she's British. And I'm like, ooh, that didn't see that one coming. And then I got the documents from the courts, which said, the transcript from the time when my mother relinquished me. The judge asked, is your name Joyce? Yes, sir. Are you the mother of this Negro child? So in my 40s, I had this bombshell dropped on me that my birth parents were primarily British, English, and black. And you can imagine, that's quite a shock to find out.
Yeah.
Um, but also that I wasn't Italian, so it was as much, the new things that I found, but also, this mystery, this Italian identity was crumbled in a lot of ways. Um, so and I think, America may be going through a similar thing, this change in identity. And when I grew up with my Italian family, you look at the world in one way. I'm looking at it like, well, it's and the world was different back then. There weren't as many ethnicities, there weren't as many, different religions, immigrants. We were also an immigrant family. So I go from being an immigrant family to being, a pilgrim and, someone with insider privilege as a British pilgrim, but then also an identity as a slave. And, I'm not going to lie, it messed with my head. It really did mess with me, and it made me go back and, look at my life, through new eyes. With all the stuff that's going on, with Charlie Kirk, with the murder in Charlotte, I lived in Charlotte for 8 years. Um, the woman with the baseball, the Karen, the Phillies Karen. It's just been a week of so many contrasts, and I've been struggling with where do I find myself in this spectrum of, left, right, red, blue. Um, and I honestly can't, when it comes to the race issue, like I said, I grew up white. I felt I was white, but then you find out later in life, that my family, now that I meet that side of my family, I had an uncle who was a Black Panther during the Civil Rights era. I had another brother who played for the Vikings, or another uncle that played for the Vikings. And I actually there was at least one, maybe two of the brothers. My father had seven brothers. There were one or two that were so light-skinned they were able to pass as white. So I find myself thrown into this racial battle. Um, and some of the photos that I got during the time, like I have a photo of my grandmother, my biologic grandmother, leaning on Muhammad Ali's knee at his training camp in
Oh,
Pennsylvania.
wow. Yeah.
And as an Italian, Muhammad Ali wasn't really in my story. And then now when I see my biologic mother, comfortably leaning on Muhammad Ali, like it's no big deal, like she just felt totally comfortable with him. And then I see me and my family right next to Muhammad Ali, who was right next to Malcolm X, who was right next to, Martin Luther King. And I mean, I understand and I sympathize with the battles, but it's very hard for me to pick a side. And I don't think anyone in the country should pick sides either. And it's just, I guess that's my message that, going through the identity changes and, I had to battle a lot of those things within me. I couldn't love my white side and hate my black side, or love my black side and hate my white side. And where does the Italian side come in? So the immigrant side, the racial side, the religious side, the political side, so many of those things have changed in me that, I really am a mutt in so many ways. And, I think we all are. And I would just warn people, or try and warn my kids not to take it so, to try and choose the path of peace, not the path of making matters worse. Violence. This kid who shot Charlie Kirk. I don't know his motives. I don't know, what he was going for, but it is, once again, it's just so divided. But there's a life that's lost, and in this country, you should never be, murdered for your beliefs. And whether that was Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, or Charlie Kirk, it's life is so precious, and to lose your life in this country over ideals and ideas and your speech just upsets me. And I hope people can, come to terms with this, that like I said, I've had to learn how to coexist, my different pieces, my contrasting identities and race. Like I said, I've had to identify, where do I fit in with this? And, kind of the conclusions that I've come to in the book is that I am who I am, and I think this country is who it is. Some of the things you don't like, The illegal immigration. I mean, I do think we need to, we need laws. We need, but, if you're here legally, you can't hate. It just can't be it can't be a culture and a community and a country of hate on either side. And, it's a very difficult thing. What do you think on this, Neil? I
No,
mean,
so here is my perspective different than your perspective because I think this is going to be a good way to look at all this. I am in a huge looking at my career. Like, AI replacing medicine, a little bit longer period of time, maybe 10, 20 years, robots will be doing a lot of performing surgeries. There'll be less doctors. When you're talking about the industry I'm in, we're in a very fast paced chase world that we got to become better and better every day just to survive.
mhm.
And you could see the stress in specific industries where they're in this with the chase with AI and to try to keep up with AI and trying to learn new things constantly. It could become a very big stressor cooker. And to look at how, as entrepreneurs, we constantly are trying to grow and develop. And then we're dealing with lots of people struggling outside our ecosystem because of the economy, because of certain policies. No, who it doesn't matter if you're for or against the policy. We're still not where we were years ago, and a divide in this country. And so I, as a journalist, because I interview both the right, the left, the middle, the every walk of life on my show, I just I can't I really can't just take one side. I
Yeah.
really can't say, oh my gosh, I'm going to leverage this. Give you an example. My taxes go up, I work harder, or I figure out other strategies. If my taxes go down, I hire more people. So you kind of go with whatever the political stance is and what's happening, but it's not the end of the world. And a lot of people base what happens every day that's out of their control instead of what is in your control. And
Hmm.
control is to be happy. And control is to do what you love to do. Enjoy your life. Try your best. Become better yourself. You, everything outside of this is out of our control.
Right.
And we have to learn that. So when I look at the perspective you talked about this week, first thing I look at is this crazy technology changes every day and it becomes very frustrating, especially when you're trying to create a system.
Hmm.
Second thing you see is AI continues to change. And then you also have a lot of people struggling. And how do you feel about that when you're just trying to keep going? And that's where do we do in mental health now? What's the best avenue for us? Is it to
Yeah.
talk it out or is it to be grateful for what we have? Not it depends if you believe God, whatever it is, you should be grateful for what you have because a lot of people are struggling. A
Hmm.
lot of people are going through a lot of hard times. And we have to kind of take that 360 perspective. Yes, we could be depressed. It's colder out, right? It's starting to, you wake up, you're like, do I really have to get up? Shorter days now. Everything's coming into place. Summer's over. How do we kind of look at ourselves perspective, but not have this little bubble around ourselves, but everyone else who we are surrounded with every day? How can we make that day great with those people?
Yeah. I mean, I think, um, the other thing that really came up to me during this week was our discussion with Neil Smith. When we did, Neil Smith, the general manager with the New York Rangers, he had talked about, his highs and his lows in his life. And, I think, that's kind of what you're getting to in a way. Like when you're in the lows, um, it feels like you're never going to get out.
Right.
And what he said was just simply, I'm like, how do you counsel these people who've survived a suicide? He talked about his son
Yeah.
committing suicide, and he's like, I've been in the Canyon of Al or the what do they call it, the Canyon of Heroes with the ticker tape parade. I was the manager of a Stanley Cup championship team, but then I also went up to my son's room and saw him, the post. blood and what he saw after his son committed suicide, and those highs and those lows, and I think he pretty much said that, and like he contemplated himself, and I've heard stories of that. People go through a suicide, they end up there's other members of the family commit suicide. But just understanding each other, and I guess that's to commiserate and say, I get it, it's tough. Charlie Kirk, I get it. He says some things that are I don't agree with a lot of what he says. He's made some very racist statements. And it's very, same with we've
And then
talked
see, then you could lead until you have a lot of friends who are conservatives, and you could say something like that, and then you offend them so much
yeah,
that you literally lose a friendship over.
right,
Personally, none of us know. They're just a
right.
leader, right? They just were somebody who had the platform that we might not have.
Hmm.
And to look at that person and then hear someone else's opinion and then hate them for it. Here's an example of that. You just gave me that thought process. When I was a teacher, I go in the class, I go into lunchroom, but this was right before, this is before Obama as President Obama, and we would go into the classroom and we talk about politics together. And we'd have conversations and we wouldn't hate each other. Oh, you're a
Hmm.
Republican and as a teacher. Yeah, I am a Republican. And having this conversation back and forth. I call myself apolitical now in a way that, you know what? There's not politics is not me. I can strategize for either side as a marketer. I am neutral in so many aspects as a journalist and everything. But why can't we just get along? Why
Yeah.
can't we say if there's an opinion like, okay, I'm really against abortion, not to call them a horrible person for that belief system? People have beliefs, and we got to give them the opportunity to have a platform and not to be hated for it. And
Hmm.
our clickbait society wants it to be a fight.
Yeah. And I've been thinking, like I said, when people ask me where I stand, like when I was younger, it was simple. I was an immigrant family. I was an Italian family, Catholic family. I had my belief system.
Right.
It was all in a nice little box. But then I find out, oh, I've got family members that are British. I've got family members that are black. I've got, and you expand, and as you learn these people, you see the commonality. The other thing that I think that I had a great experience with was when I went to the service. I went, I lived for 4 years in Japan. I did mission trips as well, where, we went 4 times to Madagascar. I've done a lot of international travel. And, the thing that always struck me that, in Japan, you could say there's so many different, there's Western versus Eastern thought. There's so many things, there's, the strength of the individual in America and Western world, and the strength of the community in Asian worlds and Eastern worlds. But when all those things fall out, we wear suits, they wear kimonos, but when all those differences fall out, the commonality is there with everyone in the world. You're worried about your family, your finances, your health, your children, your identity, and I was thinking of, like, the Venn diagram. You've got whites, you've got blacks, you've got Asians, you've got Muslim, you've got, all these circles. And it seems like they are becoming more and more separate with one another. And I think what we need to try and do is to increase that space in the middle that is common ground for all of those. And that's the common ground that's in the middle of that Venn diagram are those commonalities that are human, that are your physical health, your mental health, your family health, your financial health. Everyone is concerned about those things. And you have to, I think, you have to empathize with the other groups that they have different concerns as well, but it comes down to the basics. They're worried about their family, their finances, their health, their children, their education. And I think we have to try and, understand the commonality between the groups, not further separate them and divide them so that there is no common ground. And that, I don't know if that helps, but that's the human element of it, the human identity um, has to be number one. The wars that are going on, it's you're going to keep fighting, 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 and you destroy everything. It's just we
Yeah.
need to learn to get along.
See, and I think that's the key component, but I think mental health is something we all have to look at and what we define it. I know that therapists would get upset with me. I don't do well with sharing all my emotions and feelings and going over the things that are bothering me over and over again. I have a different practice that I kind of take, and that is, looking at each day. The past is in the rear window, the future's here, and what's on the present, and what's my plans, and what do I want to accomplish, and what do I want to do, and take my mistakes or challenges and move forward in a better manner. Everything that I went through is part of my journey to where I want to go in life, in the journey of life, and to not reflect so much, but I do. And that
Oh, yeah.
probably is looking at the past or hating where you are
Regrets,
now,
shame, shame,
all
guilt,
these things. And
the mistakes that you've made that you can't forgive yourself over. Um, and I think,
as a doctor, and you studied everything in physiology, not just, you became a surgeon, but meaning you have expertise that at least have gone through a lot of those courses in school. What do you say to yourself when you look at mental health today, and how we give people a pill before we really look at other things? Like, for example, I'm going through, just to improve my brain, I'm doing bioneurofeedback right now, and I'm going to do some brain scans, and I'm going to look at ultimately improving each area. And that can help with a lot of traumatic events that have happened in my life or challenges that happen in my life, because we can retrain the brain. I want to know your thoughts and what you think about
yeah,
therapy.
I think,
Yeah.
and I was a neuroscience major, but the brain and, neuroanatomy, neurophysiology, was my passion in undergrad and even in medical school. It was hard for me to choose neurosurgery or neurology. I mean, I orthopedics was more suited to my way of thinking, fixing things. But, and I think the brain is plastic. It will change, and all the time we spend on social media and comparing yourself to others, it sets up an unrealistic expectation by feeding your brain all these expectations that, oh, I need a Lamborghini, oh, I need to go on
Yep.
vacation, oh, I need to be with these friends, I need to and when you're comparing to other people, and I do think that, for me, like you say, it's therapy or religion people find solace in. For me, something that really spoke to me was meditation and some Zen Buddhism. That
Mhm.
I was in Japan, and I went to Thailand one year, and I sat at the basement of a Thai wat and learned how to meditate. And like you talk about, it's the regrets and the shame and the guilt from the past. It's the fear of the future, but all you really have is the present moment.
And
You
well,
know?
how are you going to live that moment right now at 8:58 a.m.?
Right, exactly. And the whole exercise of meditation is to get that little point down. It's not, this second, it's this half a second, it's this instant. Like, I am present this instant. Everything is fine. And for me, it was very a practical exercise. And I really started doing some meditation during residency, and especially when I was doing some spine surgery. And you're operating near the spine for the first time in your life, as a 25-year-old, 26-year-old young man. Um, Tell me that's not nerve-wracking.
Yeah.
And you've got your attending physician across the table from you, and you want to look good in front of him, and you want to look good for the patient, you want to look good for yourself. It's very stressful, you know.
Yes.
And what I did with the meditation was, I'm like, okay, here I am. I'm at the table. Nothing bad has happened. Okay, I'm going to grab my instrument. I'm going to put my instrument down. Nothing bad has happened. I'm going to put my instrument under the bone, and I'm going to take a bite. I'm making sure there's no nerves in there.
I can't
Everything
believe,
is
yeah,
fine.
what you do.
Everything is fine. There's no problems here. I take a bite. Oh, perfect. And it's that one step, that one movement, that one instant of time And then next thing you know, the surgery's over. You find the nerve root, you move the nerve root, you find the disc, you incise the disc, you pull it out. Each step you have to like not be worried about what if I cut the nerve? What if I hit a blood vessel? What if I, what if I, worried about the future. So, for me, that was very, it wasn't this mysterious God. It wasn't these, the mysteries that we can't understand. It was very practical to just live in the moment. Okay. I'm living in a house. I've got a beautiful family. I've got a beautiful life. Um, you need to worry about things. You can't stay in the, you do have to plan and prepare. But I think for me, it's hard to know. But for me, I think that and there's so many religions and so many philosophies that go down to that live in the moment, and I think that will get a lot of the fear, the anxiety, the shame, and the guilt. I mean, I had a lot of shame and guilt subconsciously as an adoptee. When your mother gives you up at birth, that is something that, so many of the adoptees, you remember we had um, Connor on the show, and he
Yeah.
talked about that same guilt, that sense of relinquishment, that sense of, I'm not good enough. I've been given away. So, some of it is subconscious. You get yelled at when you're younger, you get, corrected, you make a mistake, and you carry those things with you. But, forgiving yourself, I've found is for me is one of the most difficult things. It's easy to understand everyone's position. I can forgive other people for what they did, but forgiving yourself, I found is some of the most. But you have to forget that. You have to leave those mistakes you made in the past, those shames, the guilt. You have to leave them in the past and move forward and be better today, be better tomorrow, be better the next day, and be better for your family, for your other people. That it's okay to be a little selfish and take care of yourself. We all need to do that.
Powerful stuff. I'm Dr. Jack when you talk about these things, and it's a good way to close out is basically take care of your health. Your health is your wealth, not just your brain, but your
Hmm.
body. They all relate to everything. And if you're not focusing on your health first before lots of things, which is sometimes not taught in all religions, right? Your
Hmm.
health is so important so that you can go out there and be the best you can around the people you're around every day. And that's where you really learn, ask questions, find the right experts in health so you can optimize your body so that you can handle all the changes in life that you're going to go through.
Hmm. And move on. These horrible things that have happened, they're unjustifiable. Like I said, the stabbing in Charlotte, the shooting, the stealing the baseball. I mean, we get so wrapped up in these things, and it's, it becomes male, female, white, black, Democrat,
See,
Republican,
that's because of
and
clickbait.
it's
Yeah.
yeah, it's just but you got to, like I said, we got to go back to the humanity. That shooter was probably fearful, anxious, whatever. Charlie Kirk was, same thing. He's fearful for his family. He's trying to make the world a better place. There and the shooter, I don't know what his motives were, but don't get caught up in these things that it is that important that you have to do a drastic thing like, murder or suicide.
Right.
It just it's
Uh,
hard to know what to do. It's been a rough week, and we don't typically go into politics, and these things are unanswerable. But I think me and you both needed to talk this over, and I needed to
yeah.
kind of, you need to get it
Right.
straight in your own mind.
You get a lot of it in therapy and the talking about things, but if you go back and relive over and over again the past, it's going to happen again. All right. So best place to go is the ultimate men's clinic.com. Appreciate it. Like and subscribe to the channel, like and subscribe to the podcast, share it with your friends, and I appreciate it.
Thank you, Neil. Have a
All right.
great day. Live in the moment.
We will.